All right, we're getting there. We've brought these nice sounds into our game, so let's start making use of them. I'd like to have a sound play when our clown bounces off the walls. So let's go into our collision event and come down below where we've got all our other code, and let's call in another built-in function that's part of the GameMaker language, which is called audio. And then you'll see there are a whole bunch of things: audio channel, create buffer, create play, etc., etc. Oh my gosh, there are tons and tons of them. Well, the one we want is play sound. And then we're going to pass it some parameters that will help determine how the sound will play and which sound will play. First thing we're going to do is tell it which sound to play. So if you remember, we had SFX was one of ours, and we had one called click. Well, that's not the one we want. Actually, we want a different sound. What do we call it? SFX bounce. Aha, bounce. And we want to tell GameMaker what the priority level is for playing this sound. It's a kind of a weirdly defined value, but the idea is if you've got multiple sounds that are going to be playing simultaneously, you can give one sound priority over other sounds in getting played if you give a higher value here. So if I say 10, it means I want this to be high priority in playing this sound. And then the last parameter that we're going to pass in to this built-in function is whether or not we want the sound to loop. And we don't want it just to play one time, so we'll say false. All right, I'm going to borrow this code because we're going to make use of it here in just a second when we add the ability to click on our clown. But for now, let's just see if it'll play the sound. Sounds good, although I have to tell you it sounds it doesn't sound like a click. That sounds like a bounce. Let's go back and check our sounds. I may have misnamed these. Aha. For whatever reason, I called my click a bounce, and I called my bounce a click. Just in case you thought it was confusing, well, I've added to the confusion. So I sort of named these backwards. So if I want the one that actually sounds more like a bounce, I could fix the name, but I'll just call it click. There we go. Fine. So now we have sound effects. Now let's add a little bit of interactivity to our clown. So right now the clown flies around, it bounces off the wall, but there isn't any interaction with the human player, which of course for a real game you'd want to have all kinds of interaction with the real player, and there are a bunch of different types of interactions that are built in to GameMaker that you can connect to. For example, there are keyboard controls, and there are mouse controls. These are sort of the two main ones. So we're going to add in a mouse control. If I come and add event and choose mouse, we will choose left pressed as the event that we want to do. And what we're going to do with this left pressed, well, let's give a description. We are going to move, give points, play sound. Right. First, we're going to move some random location inside our room. And up to this point, the scripting that we have been using has been really pretty simple. But of course, I'd like to give you something a little bit tougher. So if you think for a little bit about what I want to have happen, I want it so that when the player clicks on the clown will randomly reposition itself to some other location in our room. So how in the world am I going to make that happen? And how am I going to make sure that when it repositions itself some other location of the room, it doesn't reposition itself right inside one of our walls, right? So in effect, I need to pick a random location that is in the room, but is not inside one of the walls. So to make all that happen, we need to do just a little tiny bit of math to pull it off. So I'll type this out and sort of explain what I'm doing as I go through it. Okay. First of all, every object or every instance of an object inside GameMaker has an X coordinate on the screen and has a Y coordinate on the screen. And we can use these X and Y coordinates to specify where we want to position a game object inside our room. We can also use the X and Y to read what is the current location of a game object inside the room. So in our case, we're going to set the position of the game object by updating its X value and its Y value. X is its pixel coordinate going horizontally, and Y is its pixel coordinate going vertically. All right, so let's say we want to set the X position to some random value. Well, you remember we used already a built-in function called iRandomRange. And we pass into iRandomRange the smallest possible number that we want to pull out and the largest possible number that we want to pull out. And then GameMaker will randomly or pseudo-randomly will grab some number from within that range. So in our case, we want to pick a X value that is not 0, because that would be within the wall on the left-hand side of the room, and not the width of the room, because that would be within the right-hand side of the room, inside a wall, but somewhere that's not in those walls, but in between. So how can we do that? Well, we're going to make some tricky stuff here. First of all, we created an object called object wall, right? Object wall, remember that one? And that object wall contains a sprite that's associated with the object, and that sprite has a set of dimensions. If you remember, it was 64 pixels by 64 pixels, right? And when we imported the image for that wall, you'll remember that I had you set the origin point to the middle center of the image. So the origin point is at like 32 pixels on the X and 32 pixels on the Y. So what we need to do is we're going to say, all right, for our smallest value possible for this X to be, we want to take the width of that sprite. And fortunately, there's a built-in variable for this called sprite_width. So we're saying, all right, GameMaker, look for that wall object. Find the sprite that's associated with us and give us that value. Right? So that's the smallest possible position for the X coordinate. Right? The width of that sprite, if you remember, is 64. So it's going to say the smallest possible value is 64. So it can't be inside the wall. Plus, now it's going to get a little bit tricky. If we just say position the player potentially at 64 pixels from the left-hand side of the screen, seemingly that would be okay, but it's actually not. And the reason it's not is that when we imported the image for our clown sprite, we also put its origin point in the middle and center. What that means is that if we were to position the clown object at 64 pixels from the left-hand side of the screen, it would be halfway inside the wall because its origin point is right at its center. So we need to move over even farther to the right, half the width of the sprite for that clown. Ooh. So how do we do that? Well, we can say plus, and now we're going to say sprite width again. Now we're talking about ourselves, this current clown object, because that's what we're attaching this script to, divided by 2. Right? That's the smallest possible value. So essentially it's going to be 64 plus 32. That's where we'll end up as our smallest possible value. Now we need to pass it the largest possible value. Well, we want the room width minus the width of the sprite for the wall minus half the width of the sprite for the clown. Well, we're lucky here too because there is a built-in variable that will tell us how wide the room is, called room width. And we want to subtract from the room width the width of the sprite that's associated with the wall object minus half the width of this clown sprite. Oh, brother. Okay. Now, if you look at the PowerPoint that is on Blackboard site that goes with this lesson, you will notice that the code listed there is slightly different than what I've typed in here. What's listed in there for this X is something like this, self.x. Self is a built-in keyword in GameMaker language that says I want to now be talking to the object that this script is connected to. I'm talking to myself. It's not actually necessary because this script is attached to the clown, so it sort of knows that it's talking about itself when we write X. But if you want to be really clear, you can say self.x. What comes before this dot is a way of addressing a specific object. Just like here we're saying we're talking to object wall, here we're talking to ourselves. It's the same thing you might want to do here where we say object wall.sprite width, just to make it clear that here we're talking about ourselves, right? And same thing here, we're talking to ourselves. And that'll work. Either way. Now I'm going to be lazy and copy this. And instead of setting the X, I'm going to set the Y. And I'm going to say I want the height of the wall sprite, which is the same in this case as the width, but just to be clear. And I want the half of the height of the clown sprite, which is actually a different dimension than the width. And again here, I want half of the height of the clown sprite. Ooh, it's a lot of work. Okay, let's save this and let's see what it looks like. Okay, if I click, he bounces off somewhere else. Okay, it works. It's not the greatest code because if we were really going to tweak this, we might want the clown not to appear within a certain distance of its previous location. We might want to make it farther away, and you could do that, but it's like beyond what we need to work with here. Instead, let's do something a little easier, which is we'd like to have some sound play here too. So I'm going to copy what we put into the collision events, come over here, and I'll paste that into here, and because of my crazy naming, it's not actually called click, it's called bounce. Excellent. All right, I can click it.